is a performance marketing agency, but we tend to work on... Can you hear me? Oh, there
Hold
we
it
go.
up a bit.
Yeah. Performance marketing agency. We work with a range of enterprise clients globally, so the likes of Salesforce, Expedia, Skyscanner, eBay, Gumtree, and our work with large data sets has led us down the route of machine learning and AI for the last 4 or 5 years, so we've built out quite a strong AI capability. And that got us awarded last year as one of the most innovative marketing agencies in Australia by the AFR, which we're very proud of. So yeah, that's me.
And I believe you're a passionate guitar collector and have played with some famous bands from the noughties.
And a bit earlier. Yeah.
A bit earlier?
Yeah, I am.
Are you willing to drop any names?
I can drop some names. I'm not sure if anyone will have heard of them. So I think the most famous is I played with the Specials. Did anyone know the Specials? No. Yes. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah. So played with the Specials twice, once in Amsterdam and once in Morecambe, as well as the Two-Tone Review. And then for people in the noughties that remember bands like Les and Jake, I spent a lot of time on the road with a band called Real Big Fish back in the day. So still friends with those folks.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
All right, so AI, here to stay, and businesses are all getting into it. Using it for operational efficiencies, to create new products, for marketing purposes, but it's all still very new and we're discovering a few potholes along the way. So, am I clicking the wrong direction? Sorry. There we go. This evening we're going to get into some detail around, from a legal and compliance perspective, we're going to talk about different types of AI and trends, and then we're going to talk about, both from a legal and practical perspective, privacy, consumer protection, and IP, and we're going to have some real-life case studies as well of actual clients from both organisations what they've been experiencing, and you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. So our two hosts here are at the forefront of all of this and have lots of knowledge and practical experience. So we're going to kick off now with Paul. Would you tell us about the different types of AI that businesses are using and what kind of emerging trends in AI and marketing you're seeing?
Yes, I will. But before I do, can I just get a quick show of hands for people who have used AI? So has anyone used ChatGPT? Brilliant. Okay. Anyone use Claude? Perplexity? Less. Okay. That's just to kind of gauge how I put this across. So from our perspective, AI is a bit of a what they call a suitcase term, where people bundle a lot of things in it. And I think when I'm having conversations with people these days, they're normally talking about ChatGPT or other large language models. From our perspective, when we talk about AI, we're talking about a much broader field of expertise. So we're talking about machine learning, which is how my company got into AI. We're talking about deep learning. We're talking about natural language processing, and we're also talking about things like large language models as well, and sometimes computer vision. So I think that's what we tend to talk about, and I just want to give you a bit of an overview in terms of my route into AI. We did a large project for a travel brand a few years ago, and I'm not going to mention any names because I think this is being recorded. Yeah, okay. So we had around 20 billion rows of data to analyze for a client, so we could analyze it, generate insights, and activate the data for them. And we quite quickly figured out that we couldn't do that using normal data analytics techniques. So what we had to do was hire a team to do that for us, and that's how we got into AI. So whilst most of you will be familiar with ChatGPT and things like that, my background is really the machine learning component, and we have more recently moved into large language models. So trends. There are a few trends that we're seeing. I think depending on the level of sophistication of the clients that we're talking to, at a less sophisticated level, there is the adoption of large language models across the board. So whether it is the use of Perplexity for research, the use of GPT for content generation or Jarvis, but on the more sophisticated side, the type of clients that we work with, we're seeing things like RAG. I don't know if anyone's come across that yet, but it's retrieval augmented generation. It's similar to ChatGPT, but it calls on a more select corpus of data that you own, and you point it in the direction of those sources. So that's something that we're seeing growing rapidly in enterprise.
Lovely, thank you for sharing that. And what about you, Phoebe? Are you seeing any trends from a legal perspective with AI?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of I'm coming from it from the perspective of an individual who works in a firm that wholeheartedly embraces AI. So we're sort of sitting amongst some of your clients where some of that usage is a more simple and some of it's quite complex. But I'm also someone who's advising clients that are doing things like this every day. So we're sort of seeing a lot of different trends in sort of uptake. And I guess the biggest trend really is just an incredible amount of growth with how quickly and how much businesses have started using AI. And I guess the trend from a legal perspective and sort of considering overall the key takeaways from a seminar like this, I think a lot of people think of AI as unregulated. You hear people saying it's the Wild West and anything goes. And I think from a legal perspective, my biggest reminder is that is absolutely not the case. There are so many laws that apply, and laws that have been around for hundreds of years that have application to this really new tech. So from that perspective, we're going to see a lot more laws slowly coming out to address this usage, but there already are a lot that apply. So,
all right, thank you for that. Well, let's start talking about privacy. Privacy is a massive issue. It's become even bigger and more high profile with all these big issues with data breaches and so forth. The penalties are becoming really extreme. So what are the implications and the risks around privacy from an AI perspective, and how can businesses protect themselves and avoid getting into some of these challenges? What are the challenges that you're actually seeing?
Yeah, so I think from a risk perspective, there's sort of two key areas when it comes to privacy where you're exposed when you're using AI in business. And one of them is unauthorized disclosures, and the other is having sort of automated decision making. So unauthorized disclosures is one that you're probably familiar with, and it's essentially that under Australian privacy law, which is, like you mentioned, about to get a lot stricter in the next 24 months, probably less, 12, you are only entitled to process information that an individual has given to you for the primary purpose to which they've consented. So if I'm getting the information to then send you some flowers, I'm a flower shop business, that is the primary reason. Anything beyond that, which is a secondary purpose, you have to have consent for. And a lot of the time, what we're seeing is the use of AI for whatever reason a business may have to improve its own mechanisms, to understand its customer base, is forming a secondary purpose that they don't have consent for. So that's a really important one, and I think Paul's probably going to have some really practical reasons, some practical responses to what to do about that, most of it being really be very, very cautious about putting any confidential private information in AI that is also potentially at risk of being breached and leaking your information and exposing you there. And then I guess the second point, before I pass over to Paul, is this automated decision making. And this is something that we're going to see come in the next 12 months, and it already is in the EU and the UK under the GDPR. But individuals are essentially entitled to know if something about them is being decided by AI. And so often we see, basically it's anything that's going to have a significant impact on them. So we see it a lot in, say, credit application or financial services, where someone's submitting an application to get some kind of a financial service, and there's a level of AI that's determining the application, and it's saying, oh, you've ticked X, Y, Z, that means you're ineligible. And so in Australia, it's going to become the case that you have to make it really clear when you're doing that. And in the UK and the EU, it's already the case that individuals are entitled to opt out of that. So they're entitled to say, no, a human has to make this decision about me. So I think that's a really important one as well, just to know, like, we have to be cautious about the systems that we're building in our businesses just to make sure that we're not breaching those laws.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And what about yourself?
Yeah, so I'll double down on a couple of those points. So I think, the compliance piece is really interesting. So again, I look to the EU to see what's happening over there from a regulatory perspective. As well as the GDPR, you have the Digital Services Act, the DMA, the Digital Marketing Act, and now the AI Act, which are good indications of where regulation is going to go globally, I think. And interestingly, we do a bit of work in Asia as well. China has a huge amount of regulation around AI, and that's developing even further. I would say Australia, I'm getting into your territory, so tell me off if you need to. But Australia is really behind the ball across all of this regulation. So I used to sit on the DMA in the UK, and we were heavily involved with the formation and the GDPR. And now I'm doing a similar role here in Australia with the IAB, and obviously we've got the privacy reform going through to completion in the next 12 months. So Australia is behind not only on the data privacy part, but now they're on the back foot when it comes to AI regulation. So I think that has some practical terms. So we tend to talk about looking at what government's doing, and we pay very careful attention to what government's regulations are, and we stick to them. And then on the other side, we look at what the platforms are doing. And I think you'd be surprised by how compliant the platforms are being at the moment. So Alphabet, Google's holding company, and Meta have both had enormous fines over the last few years. The most recent one with Meta was 1.2 billion euro, and that was for transfer of data from Europe to the US, I believe. So there is a material impact for consumers and businesses in the EU, because what we're seeing at the moment is when Meta does things like launch new products like Threads, Europeans don't get access to it straight away. So Threads there was a 5-month delay. We got it in July last year, and then there was a 5-month delay while they tried to get up to speed with the Digital Marketing Act, DMA. And more recently, if some of you have gone into your Facebook and Instagram app, you'll see that there's now Meta AI in there. That's their hosted version of Llama, their AI model. And that is, I think last time I looked, it was somewhere around 3 billion users globally are going to have access to that, but no one in Europe has access to it. So we're in this really interesting phase where, for Europeans, they've got strict regulation that protects them. You could say quite aggressive regulation. You'll probably argue on the other side of that, because it does protect consumers. But what it does is it stifles innovation a bit, and it doesn't give consumers and businesses access to the same tools that we have here or US companies have.
So in other words, we have to be very careful about not only doing the wrong thing, but huge penalties could apply.
Absolutely.
And reputational damage therefore follows.
Absolutely.
With all the publicity.
Yeah.
Right. So let's move on to intellectual property. There's a lot of discussion at the moment about how people are actually using other people's IP when they use AI technology. And so what are the risks, Phoebe, that we're seeing in terms of using other people's IP? How can companies, when they're creating things using AI, actually protect their own IP at the same time?
Yeah. So I think this is another hot topic, and you've probably heard a bit about it. And I think, again, this sort of splits into two key points, and one of them is inadvertent infringement, and the second is, well, can you actually protect anything that's generated from AI? So the first one has really got to do with, well, where do the training models that have been input into these machine learning generative AI systems, where have they gotten this information from? And when they're answering a question like, you're all familiar with asking ChatGPT something and it gives you an answer, which you can then copy into something else, you can turn it into a Facebook post, a marketing post, where has that language come from? And then oftentimes it's verbatim somebody else's. and they have posted it online, which is how it's available, but they are the lawful owner of that. And it's really easy to infringe that because it's come through this source where you can't even really acknowledge it a lot of the time. It doesn't provide a source. So that's really the first one. And I think that's sort of the more simple use of AI that we see. But the second point that's really important is that anything that's generated by AI, any output that it creates, is basically ineligible for IP protection in Australia and really the whole world. Because we have these principles which have existed for decades that say you have to have a human author to be eligible. And so there's sort of been some test cases that have looked at that. One of them was Redbubble, which was a copyright case, where they said, ultimately the court said, yeah, that it just has to be a person. We can't have AI generating things that's not eligible to be protected. And we also recently had the Commissioner of Patents and Thaler, which also was sort of overturned and went all the way to the full court where they said, yeah, it has to be a human individual, a natural person. And so the impact of that is really practical. And I think sometimes we're talking about companies where code is being generated out of AI output and then integrated into their proprietary software, which they intend to protect through IP or sell as if it is new and proprietary. And we just have to be really cautious about making those sort of claims or putting all of the value in AI-generated output when it might be ineligible, and it really ultimately exposes you to the risk of being fined by somebody or it having no protection over your own things and then competitors being able to do the exact same thing.
Wow. Okay.
Not to scare you.
Lots to consider. What about you, Paul? What are you seeing in your organisation?
So we look at it from the opposite angle, which is about IP. I think we can get this the whole way through, aren't we? So yeah, we generate IP, so we're writing our own code. So I would say there is a lot of skepticism amongst our team, particularly the developers, around using AI to assist with code. Particularly if it's something that we are building IP. So, for instance, we've got a platform called ScalePath, which is a series of tools that we've built over 5 years for handling data at scale. It does a number of different functions. But that's built by our team, and it's our IP, and as far as we're concerned, it's a leading bit of tech. We don't want AI anywhere near that, so it's not in GitHub. We host it privately. We generate all the code ourselves. If we're working on something that is more inconsequential, say it's like a digital analytics implementation and we're doing some work on a data layer, then we'll use something like Claude Opus 3 to generate the code for us, because it really doesn't matter if it gets built into a model somewhere. So I think that's the way we're approaching it, is looking at the risk to us as a business, and this may change over the coming years, but we really don't have that much trust of the large language models at the moment not to take our IP and reuse it, and it's too valuable to us as a small business.
So the lesson is, don't put your stuff into the system.
That is Has had an interesting point on this earlier, because you've got you're trusting the system, aren't you, because of the way Microsoft presents it to you. So I think there are some ways you can trust it, but for us in code development, we are not putting anything in there, and I really discourage people putting PI into any form of large language model, particularly if it's through the web interface and not the API.
Thank you very much. All right, let's turn to consumer protection. So there's a lot of talk about misinformation and disinformation when it comes to AI. Phoebe, have you seen any examples of companies doing the wrong thing, and what were the consequences for those companies?
Yes, is the short answer, and I'm sure we'll see more. I guess when we're considering consumer guarantees, I think the most important sort of overarching concept is that you just can't mislead or deceive, and it applies to every business that engages with consumers, and that deception can take so many forms, and sometimes it's very malicious deep fakes, and oftentimes it's something much more subtle, but it can still be really detrimental to a company if they're called out for it. So one of the biggest, probably the biggest case at the moment is Trivago, who have been fined, I think it was recently, they finally settled at $44.7 million for essentially their AI model, which they were aware of this, and I think Paul might have thoughts on this, and I think there's a level of risk that businesses of this size are willing to take when they do things like this. But essentially their AI models were they're a comparative hotel website, and they were generating lists or orders essentially that were showing cheapest to most expensive hotels available, except the algorithm was favouring hotels that had paid Trivago and was essentially sponsoring them. And I think, obviously, to consumers, that can be very hard to detect. And in this case, the regulator really cracked down and said, this is absolutely not on. But I think there's some more subtle ones where sort of the regulators said, oh, be cautious about this, or there's things you should be doing to protect yourself. One of them was sort of Upbank. They brought in a chatbot that essentially you could chat with, and it would give you some financial advice in a very general nature. And the regulator was saying, we've got to be really careful about this because people might not know that it's not providing personalised advice or that it's not a person. And essentially the fix for that was just having clear disclaimers and transparency. And I think that's the fix for a lot of it. And I hope that my risk-averse lawyer perspective isn't completely swaying you against AI, because I actually love it and I really embrace it. And I think it's a fantastic tool. It just has to be used in the right way. And I think that's pretty much, and you might have some other ones as well, but eBay was another one where they were sort of using, a tool that was sort of giving, when users uploaded an item to sell, it would give you a estimated amount that you might be able to get for that item. And the data set that it was using to calculate that was sort of what consumers thought in the end, or whoever sort of uncovered it, I think it was Choice, it was a sort of a competitor comparison website, that the range was so big it was skewing the numbers. So it was telling people they could get a lot more for what they were selling than they actually could. And in that case, I don't think there were actually any fines from a regulator. It was more just reputational damage of people going, oh, hang on a minute, and a whole bunch of articles are written and there's a bit of hoopla. So I think sometimes that's the softer end of the scale. It's not always $44 million, but I suspect we'll see more as well, because we know so many of these companies are starting to do this.
Yes, I mean, $44 million should be a deterrent to most businesses, I would think. What about you, Paul?
Yeah, so I'll give you my full answer in a moment, but just to respond to that point, first of all, disclaimer, eBay and Expedia, both my clients, I had nothing to do with either of those particular cases. They're both very law-abiding organizations, which I respect deeply. So I think to respond to your point, I think $44 million in a market like the travel industry global is actually not a big fine to pay if you're going to get a competitive advantage. So I think there's some strategic decision making around risk versus reward there. How much can you push the boundaries to get the reward? I'm not saying that's what our clients do, but I think that might have been a conversation that would happen somewhere along the line. In terms of, do you mind repeating the question again?
Cases, examples of companies who've done the wrong thing.
Okay, so I think the one that will go down in history for me is Google with Claude. Not Claude, Gemini. So did everyone see that? And in case you didn't, okay, so Google released the latest version of Gemini recently, and it was trained with a heavy political and racial bias. And when queried to produce images of the founding fathers of the United States of America and Nazi soldiers, they were all people of color. So obviously that was inaccurate historically, and it caused a significant problem for Google. They lost around $90 billion in valuation as an immediate response to that. They have regained it all back though, and a bit more. So I don't feel too sorry for them. But from a reputational perspective, I think it did damage with the technology community. I think images are low impact in the grand scheme of things, but if you're using AI like we are to analyze data, and they're talking about building it into things like BigQuery, Looker Studio, you want to know if you're making big financial decisions based on that data, that actually the model is well trained, it's ethically aligned, and you can trust it. And just things like that really undermine your trust in the model, and I know it has for me. In terms of a case study, have we got time for me to give a couple of case studies? Okay. So some narrow misses we've had. We have produced content at scale for a large travel brand. So last year we did about 17,000 pieces of content in 7 languages. That took us about 18 months to actually build the technology that was capable of delivering that. And there was a big process to go through human validation and quality checking of all of those pieces of content. And there were some mistakes in there that we had to weed out. So a couple of mistakes that would have caused our clients and us reputational damage are things like, on the low severity scale was an article around Toronto being a nice place to visit in Saudi Arabia. We know that's not the case. There was also an article about trips to the airport, DLP, Disneyland Paris. That airport does have an international code, but it doesn't exist. So it made up airlines, it made up routes, it made up itineraries around travel. It was quite convincing, but not real. And then a more controversial one, had this got through that, this would probably cause us problems, was a Lufthansa route from the Congo to London. It was dressed up as a passenger route, very popular. And when we did a bit of digging, actually, it was a cargo route. So it was suggesting that you might want to jump under a plane and go from the Congo to the UK. And then I'd say the most severe, again, that we picked up was a trip to Donetsk in Ukraine being a highly recommended trip, which, as we all know, it's a war-torn area at the moment, and it's on every do-not-fly list. So that was a problem. We managed to pick those up and many, many more like it, but we had to build systems around that. And that's now part of our model. So we've figured that out. It's brand safe, it's accurate, and it causes us minimal problems, touch wood.
Well, some very insightful experiences there. So, I mean, having had all of this experience, and we've seen some big penalties, we've seen some big issues, but businesses want to use AI. So what are some really practical tips that you can provide off the back of your experience from a legal and marketing/practical perspective that you can give our audience this evening for using AI?
Yeah, so to maybe sort of give one in each of the categories we've spoken about. For privacy, I think the best thing you can do is just undergo a comprehensive audit of your own company. Even if you're not yet using AI, you probably have individuals that are and could be potentially jeopardizing private information. So I think just conduct an audit, have a look at what are your privacy policies, what are your notices, have you got your house in order? And that will go a long way in terms of protection. As far as IP goes, I think the most important thing is it's a similar just knowledge of the landscape. If you're training models, if you're using models, have a look at the licenses, where they come from, what you're actually permitted to do, or get a lawyer to help you to make sure that those are doing what you want them to. And as far as consumer protection goes, I think the most important thing really to sort of combat the risk of misleading or deceiving is it's transparency and it's substantiation. So just have really good records to back up why you're doing what you're doing, why you're making the claims you are. And I think record keeping, if a regulator comes knocking, is really the first point of call, and it can get you over the line most of the time, but you have to have it in place at the time. So those are my 3.
Thank you. Very practical. What about yourself, Paul?
Excellent. So yeah, I think for me, the approach we've taken is policy. Make sure we get our policy in place in terms of how we use it as a company and how we use it for our clients. And there are some ethical considerations in there about what we're willing to do for our clients as well. Then I would say from a more practical point, it's an innovation project and you really need to set it up well. So that's the approach we take is make sure you're actually fulfilling a business objective. We have so many businesses knocking on our door saying we want to use AI, but they don't have a use case, they don't have an objective. So make sure you have an objective first. Senior stakeholder buy-in has been extremely important to us, and surprisingly very senior stakeholder buy-in. And communicating everything that can go wrong and what they should expect from the project has been very important. And then building cross collaboration teams as well. So AI projects aren't simple, so you need to pull the right people in. So the obvious people are ML ops, developers, engineers, sometimes product, but we also work very closely with legal and compliance. So legal on our side, but also legal and compliance on the client side as well. And I think the only other thing I'd say on that is pilot, start small. So every project that we've done, we've started in a limited way, something that we can easily control, demonstrate results, and then scale it up from there. So I think that's our kind of actionable tips.
Great, really practical tips from both of you. Thank you. And we're going to open the floor to questions in just a second. Before we do, I just want to tell you about a couple of things. We've got our next event is Demystifying Startup Funding, Strategies for Growth on Wednesday, the 8th of May. So it'll be right here if you're a startup and you're interested in learning more about how you can get capital for your business. Please join us. You can register on our website. I also want to tell you just really quickly about LegalVision's membership model. LegalVision is a full commercial firm, but we have an unusual and very popular membership model, which is quite comprehensive. It includes things like unlimited consult requests, so you don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost you every time you need to speak to your lawyer because it's all included. Unlimited document reviews, so anything from employment to supplier contracts, any kind of documents that you need reviewed, that's included. Unlimited trademark reviews are in there as well. Sorry, trademark registration, my apologies. So guaranteed quick turnaround, and you have access to over 100 lawyers. And we're actually offering a complimentary legal health check, so we can have a look at your business for you and just a bit of a high-level audit and identify any areas where you might not be covered from a legal perspective and help you to identify what gaps you need to fill. So if you're interested in having a chat with us, a no obligation consultation, just let me know, or one of the LegalVision team, and we'll get someone to give you a call and set up an appointment. And if you'd like to reach out to Paul, here are his details.
Thank you very much. So off script, we have been using LegalVision for a couple of years now, I think, and it really is a very good service. So Lainey hasn't asked me to say that, but we're on a.
I'm holding a gun to you.
we're on a subscription, and it's just been fantastic, the support we've had. So thank you to you and the team for that. So yeah, these are my contact details. Please feel free to reach out to me. So in terms of the things that we're doing for clients at the moment, we're having no obligation discussions. If you want to talk about ways that you can use your data to increase marketing or advertising performance, that's what we do. And also a bit of education around Gen AI. So if you maybe got a board that you want educated on this stuff, we've got materials ready to go, so we can come in and speak to senior members of your company and kind of make your life easier by setting realistic expectations and just bringing you up to speed a bit.
Excellent, thank you. So let's open the floor to questions. I will take the microphone now.
Hello, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, a quick question about the automated decision making and the necessity of explaining to somebody like why a decision has been made because they chose particular values. We know that a lot of models are kind of unexplainable. Does that take them off the table for like automated decision making that involves like humans in that case? Do you think?
So in my opinion, if you're following the book, it really should. Even if you did it in a private cloud environment. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but Llama 3 has just been released, 70 billion parameter model, moving to 400 billion parameter model soon. That is a lot of computing capability right there, and you can host it in your own cloud, and in theory, you can push data in there and have better governance over it, but you've still put that data into the model. And what I've said to clients, it's like trying to unbake a cake. If someone asks you to take the egg out of a cake at the end, you just can't do it. And that's what I think putting data into large language models is like.
Awesome. Thank you.
Next question. Really? Another one?
Sorry, hello. Next one, you were talking about a hesitancy to put, basically work with a language model to produce code. And obviously, Phoebe, you raised you both raised the concern about code having, IP being produced by a real human. But also there's the hesitancy to put like IP into a model to get something back out of it. If you were self-hosting, would you have that same hesitancy still about putting IP into it?
No. I think if we were self-hosting, it'd be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So you talked a lot about transparency. At which point do you draw the line? Where do you actually communicate to your customers what parts you're using AI for? Is it once it reaches 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%? Does it need to be critical to your delivery of the service? Or where do you draw the line?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think we're yet to really see this be fleshed out in case law. But generally, the principles with sort of transparency and how the ACCC looks at things and consumer guarantees is it's all an assessment of looking in your case, in your specific business and your type of consumer, what would they reasonably expect to be informed about? So it's not so much the case that they can be a one-size-fits-all, and I wouldn't necessarily be advising the same thing for every business. Generally, consumers are considered to be increasingly intelligent and sort of alert to how the back end is being, operated. And they really just sort of want to know when it impacts them. And I think for the most part, there are many, many businesses using AI just to sort of make their back end operations more efficient. And for the most part, your consumer doesn't need to know about that. But it's really, I guess, if I'm taking a very conservative approach, I would say be overly transparent and you can't really go wrong.
Thank you.
GitHub. You raised some interesting
Yes.
points about not wanting to put stuff in.
Yes.
Do your developers use Stack Overflow?
No, they don't.
Ooh,
No.
Good. That's good practice then.
Yeah.
That-
Well,
that's
they
the
might
other-
do. I used to rely heavily on Stack. Yeah. I used to copy and paste all of my code from it and plonk it into my notebook to do all my PHP and MySQL development back in the day. It saved my day a lot of times.
Are there any other questions? Yep.
Hi, thanks for that. You mentioned that a fix for a lot of this is clear disclosure. So in the case of Gemini, the source of information, when someone's looking at it, just having a disclaimer saying, entertainment purposes only, make sure you do your own legal consulting, this is just a guideline, don't take anything as fact, things like that. Would that have any impact? Or because it comes from this company, then it's already deemed as something with authority where you can't just use a disclosure like that?
Yeah, I think the efficacy of disclaimers will be tested in this field, and they're not a cure-all by any means. And I think you've really sort of got to be considering a very real use case and a very real risk that can sort of potentially come out of that. Generally, the principle from a legal perspective is if you're saying one thing like, don't use this, only use it for entertainment, and then all of your ads are saying, look what this can do for your business, look at all then you completely invalidate your disclaimer. So in general, disclaimers can go a long way, but the conduct around them needs to align with them as well.
Thank you. So what about the case with the founding fathers and Gemini? What could have been done there, or what should they do moving forward?
So I think that's a general, an organizational cultural issue. I actually can't believe it got through testing without being identified. I heard someone describe it as think it was Lex Friedman, Google has become organizationally stupid. Obviously lots of very smart people there, but just not doing the basic checks you'd expect before releasing a model to the world. So all they can do is better alignment policy and test more.
I think as well with disclaimers, what they're ultimately serving to do is protect you or your business from the liability that might come from misuse, right? And I think with Gemini, that's clearly a pretty ineffective product if it's producing output like that. But the damage of that output, a bit difficult to quantify. And so I think the benefit of a disclaimer in that circumstance is a bit limited anyway. It's really, we're mostly protecting from sort of financial loss, really, when we're using terms like that from a legal perspective.
It's human error, yeah. Yeah, but yeah, so where I'm coming from an alignment perspective is just ensuring that the people who are training it are going to have their own bias. They're going to have political views. That stuff needs to be weeded out and it needs to be tested prior to being released. So there's the only thing they can do is test better and have better policies around it.
All right, thank you. I think that's our cue to wrap up for this evening. Thank you everyone so much for coming. Thank you very much to our special host tonight. Please do stick around and have a drink, something to eat, and network a little bit before you head off. Otherwise, thank you for coming this evening. Look forward to seeing you again soon.